I am going to be upfront with you about something. When I first heard that Amish families plant their gardens according to the phases of the moon, I thought it was folklore. Nice story, maybe something Grandma believed, but not something a retired science teacher was going to take seriously. I figured good soil, good seed, and good timing based on your frost date was all that mattered. The moon had nothing to do with it. Then an Amish friend in Holmes County, Ohio told me something that stuck with me. He said his family had planted by the moon for as far back as anyone could remember, and they had never seen a reason to stop because it worked. Not dramatically, not magically, but consistently. Better germination, stronger early growth, fewer transplant failures. He was not trying to convince me of anything mystical. He was just telling me what he had observed over a lifetime of growing food. And that is what got me. This was not someone reading an astrology blog. This was a man who had worked the soil every day of his life, and his results spoke for themselves. So I did what any stubborn former science teacher would do. I tested it. Today I am going to walk you through exactly how the Amish plant by the moon, which crops go in which phase, and how to layer this system on top of the zone-based planting schedule you are already using. I will share my own honest results, including what surprised me and what did not. And stick around to the end, because I will show you how to build a simple lunar planting calendar that takes about 5 minutes to set up and gives you a clear guide for the entire season. Here is how I came to take this seriously enough to try it. After that conversation in Holmes County, I went home and set up a simple test. I took 2 identical raised beds, same soil, same compost, same varieties. In one bed, I planted according to the lunar calendar. In the other, I planted on the same calendar dates I always used, regardless of the moon phase. I did this for 2 consecutive seasons. I want to be straight with you about what I found. The differences were not dramatic. I did not get twice the harvest or some miraculous transformation. But the lunar-timed beds showed consistently better germination rates, roughly 10 to 15% higher, and the transplants in the lunar-timed beds established noticeably faster, with less wilting and shock. Over 2 seasons, that pattern held steady enough that I could not dismiss it as coincidence. It was not proof in a scientific sense. It was observation. But it was the same kind of observation the Amish have been making for generations. And it was enough to change how I plan my planting. In Amish communities, there is a principle called Gelassenheit, Gelassenheit. It means yielding to natural order, aligning yourself with natural rhythms instead of imposing your own schedule onto things. When it comes to gardening, this principle shows up most clearly in how the Amish approach planting timing. They do not plant when it is convenient. They do not plant just because the weekend is open and the weather is nice. They plant when the natural rhythm, including the lunar cycle, tells them the conditions are right. This is not mysticism for them. It is the same kind of attentiveness that tells them to wait for the soil to warm before planting corn or to harvest onions when the tops fall over. They read natural signals, and the moon is one of those signals. The lunar cycle takes approximately 29.5 days to complete, moving through 4 distinct phases of roughly 7 days each. New moon to first quarter to full moon to last quarter, and last quarter back to new moon. Each phase in the Amish tradition is associated with different gardening activities. The basic principle is this. During the waxing moon, from new moon to full moon, gravitational pull and increasing moonlight are believed to draw moisture upward through the soil and encourage above-ground growth. During the waning moon, from full moon to new moon, decreasing light and shifting gravitational influence are believed to draw energy and moisture downward, favoring root development and below-ground activity. Now, I want to give you an honest assessment of where the science stands on this because I think you deserve that. The idea that the moon influences moisture in the soil is not as far-fetched as it sounds. We know the moon's gravitational pull moves entire oceans through tidal action. The idea that it exerts some influence on moisture in soil is at least plausible, though the measurable effect on a garden scale is extremely small. Some studies have looked at this directly. Research published in agricultural journals has found correlations between lunar phases and seed germination rates in certain crops, with modest but statistically notable differences in some cases. Other studies have found increased moisture availability in topsoil during the full moon period, and there is interesting research on moonlight itself showing that the increased light during a full moon can influence certain biological processes in plants, including germination triggers in some species. But I need to be honest. The overall body of scientific evidence is limited and inconclusive. No major agricultural institution has come out and said lunar planting is proven to work. What we have is a tradition practiced not just by the Amish, but by farming cultures across the world. From European biodynamic growers to indigenous American planting traditions to Asian rice farming calendars, all of which arrived at remarkably similar conclusions about aligning planting with the moon. That kind of cross-cultural convergence, combined with my own modest but consistent results, was enough to convince me it was worth incorporating into my planning. Not as a replacement for good gardening fundamentals, as a layer on top of them. Think of it this way: if your soil is right, your varieties are right, and your frost timing is right, planting by the moon is not going to hurt you. And if the Amish and a dozen other farming traditions are seeing consistent benefits from it over generations, it might just help. That was good enough for me. Let me show you exactly how the system works. The lunar cycle begins with the new moon, which is when the moon is completely dark in the sky. From the new moon to the first quarter, roughly the first 7 days of the cycle, the Amish consider this the ideal window for sowing above-ground crops that produce their seeds on the outside of the fruit. This category includes lettuce, spinach, celery, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, Swiss chard, and grains. The thinking is that during this phase, increasing moonlight stimulates leaf growth and the gravitational pull is beginning to draw moisture upward toward the soil surface, creating favorable germination conditions for these leafy above-ground crops. Here is what I observed in my own testing. Lettuce and spinach sown during this phase germinated about 1 to 2 days faster than seeds sown during the waning phases. The difference was small but consistent across multiple plantings. The seedlings also seemed to establish slightly more vigorously in the first 2 weeks, though by maturity the difference was harder to detect. In practical terms, here's what this means for you. When you are planting your spring lettuce, your spinach, your broccoli transplants, or your cabbage starts, check a lunar calendar and try to schedule your sowing during the new moon to first quarter window. If that window does not align perfectly with your frost date or soil temperature, your frost date and soil temperature always take priority. The moon phase is a tiebreaker when conditions are otherwise right. Plant your lettuce seeds about 1/4 inch deep and your brassica transplants at the same depth. They were growing in their pots. Standard spacing applies. The only difference is the timing within your planting window. From the first quarter to the full moon, roughly days 7 through 14 of the cycle, is the phase the Amish associate with sowing above-ground crops that produce their seeds inside the fruit. This is the big one for most vegetable gardeners because this category includes tomatoes, peppers, squash, cucumbers, melons, beans, and peas. The Amish consider this the most vigorous growth phase of the entire cycle. Moonlight is approaching its peak, gravitational pull on soil moisture is at its strongest, and the tradition holds that plants started during this window develop stronger stems, better flower set, and more robust fruiting. Here is how this looked in my testing. My tomato and pepper transplants set out during this phase showed noticeably less transplant shock compared to those set out during waning phases. They wilted less on the first day, recovered faster, and began putting on new growth sooner. My direct sown beans planted during this phase had the highest germination rate of any phase I tested, roughly 92% compared to about 80% for the same variety planted during phase 4. Again, not a massive difference, but consistent enough over 2 seasons to get my attention. For practical application, this means scheduling your tomato and pepper transplanting, your bean and pea sowing, and your squash and cucumber planting during the first quarter to full moon window. For transplants, get them in the ground in the late afternoon to reduce heat stress, water deeply at planting, and let the lunar timing do whatever it does in the background. For direct sown beans and peas, plant at 1 to 1.5 inches deep with standard spacing. For squash and cucumbers, plant seeds 1 inch deep. The key point is that you are not changing how you plant. You are only adjusting when within your existing planting window. If this way of thinking about your planting schedule is starting to intrigue you, take a second to subscribe. I have been exploring how traditional growers time their gardens, and there is more to share. Now let us look at the other half of the cycle. Chunk 2. From the full moon to the last quarter, roughly days 14 through 21 of the cycle, the Amish shift their focus entirely. This is the phase they associate with root crops, bulbs, and transplanting perennials. The moon is now waning, meaning the illuminated portion is shrinking night by night. In the Amish tradition, this decreasing light and the shifting gravitational influence draw energy and moisture downward into the soil, creating ideal conditions for anything that develops underground. This is when they plant carrots, beets, potatoes, onion sets, turnips, radishes, parsnips, and garlic. It is also when they prefer to transplant perennial herbs, berry bushes, and any established plant they are moving from one location to another because the downward energy focus is believed to encourage root establishment over top growth. Here's what I observed. My carrots and beets sown during this phase showed slightly more uniform germination compared to those sown during waxing phases. The difference was modest, maybe 5 to 8% higher germination rate, but carrot germination is notoriously inconsistent anyway, so any improvement felt significant. Where I noticed the most compelling difference was with transplanting. Perennial herbs that I moved during this waning phase showed markedly less transplant shock than those I moved during waxing phases, less wilting, faster recovery, and stronger root development when I checked them a month later. That made intuitive sense to me even as a skeptic. If there is any truth to the downward energy concept, it would logically benefit plants that need to establish roots quickly after being disturbed. For practical application, schedule your root crop sowing during the full moon to last quarter window. Carrots go in about a 1/4 inch deep, beets about 1/2 inch deep, potatoes 4 inches deep, onion sets 1 inch deep with the pointed end up, radishes about 1/2 inch deep. Standard spacing applies for all of them. If you are transplanting perennials, dividing herbs, or moving established plants, try to do it during this phase. Water deeply after transplanting and give them a light mulch to hold moisture. The combination of the waning moon phase and good transplanting fundamentals gave me the best transplant success rate I have had in 30 years of gardening. Now, is that because of the moon, or because I was simply being more intentional and careful about timing? Honestly, I cannot say for certain, but the results were real, and that is what matters to me as a gardener. The last quarter to the new moon, roughly days 21 through 29, is the phase the Amish treat as a rest period. They do not plant anything during this window. They do not transplant. They do not sow. This is the dark of the moon when lunar light is at its lowest, and the tradition holds that this is a period of dormancy in the growth cycle. Instead of planting, the Amish use this week for maintenance and preparation. They weed, they turn compost, they repair trellises and fences, they apply mulch, they deal with pest problems, they clean and organize tools. They prepare beds for the next planting cycle that begins when the new moon returns. I will tell you, this was the part of lunar planting I was most skeptical about. Taking a full week off from planting seemed like wasted time, but after 2 seasons of following this rhythm, I came to appreciate it more than any other phase. That built-in rest week forced me to catch up on all the maintenance tasks I usually neglected because I was always busy planting or harvesting something. My garden was better maintained, my compost was better managed, and I went into each new lunar cycle with clean, prepared beds ready to receive seed. It also gave me time to plan the next round of planting thoughtfully rather than rushing. The Amish do not see this as wasted time. They see it as the rhythm breathing. And after living with it for 2 seasons, I agree with them. Now, here's an important practical point that I want to make very clear, because this is where people often go wrong with lunar planting. The moon phase never overrides your fundamental planting conditions. Your frost date comes first. Your soil temperature comes first. Your weather conditions come first. The moon is a timing layer that you apply within the window that your zone and conditions already define. Here's what I mean. Say your last frost date is May 15th and you want to plant tomatoes. You know you need to wait until at least May 15th, and ideally until soil temperatures are consistently above 60 degrees. You check the lunar calendar and see that the first quarter to full moon phase falls between May 18th and May 25th. Perfect. That becomes your tomato planting window, but if the first quarter to full moon phase happened to fall between May 5th and May 12th, before your frost date, you do not plant early just to catch the moon phase. You wait for safe conditions and catch the next favorable lunar window instead. The Amish understand this intuitively because they are farmers first and moon planters second. They would never risk a crop to frost just to hit a lunar window. The moon refines their timing, it does not dictate it, and that is exactly how I recommend you approach it. Start with your zone-based planting schedule. Identify your planting windows for each crop based on frost dates and soil temperature. Then overlay the lunar phases and adjust your specific planting days within those windows to align with the appropriate phase when possible. Some months it will line up beautifully, other months it will not, and you plant when conditions are right, regardless. That flexibility is important. This is a guideline, not a rigid rule. Let me share some common misunderstandings about moon planting and how the Amish actually approach it, because a lot of the information floating around online overcomplicates this or makes claims that go well beyond what the tradition actually says. The first misunderstanding is that lunar planting is all or nothing. Some people hear about moon planting and think they need to follow it rigidly or not at all. The Amish do not approach it that way. They follow the phases when it is practical and convenient, and they plant when conditions demand it, regardless of the moon when necessary. It is a preference, not a commandment. The second misunderstanding is that the moon phase matters more than soil and weather conditions. I have seen gardening forums where people ask whether they should plant during the right moon phase, even though their soil is still cold. The answer is always no. Soil temperature, moisture, and frost safety are, and, non-negotiable. The moon phase is a refinement, not a foundation. The third misunderstanding is that lunar planting is a substitute for good gardening practice. No moon phase will compensate for poor soil, wrong variety selection, bad spacing, or inconsistent watering. The Amish who practice lunar planting also compost heavily, rotate crops, interplant companions, and tend their gardens daily. The moon is one small piece of a comprehensive system. The fourth misunderstanding is confusing lunar planting with astrology. The Amish approach to moon planting has nothing to do with zodiac signs, horoscopes, or astrological charts. It is based purely on the observable phases of the moon and their traditional association with moisture movement and growth patterns. Some almanacs mix lunar phases with astrological signs, which adds a layer of complexity that the Amish themselves generally do not follow. Keep it simple. 4 phases, 4 sets of activities. The fifth misunderstanding is expecting dramatic overnight results. The differences from lunar planting are modest. If you are expecting your tomatoes to double in size because you planted during the right moon phase, you will be disappointed. What the Amish report, and what I observed in my own testing, are small but consistent improvements in germination rate, transplant success, and early vigor. Over a full season, those small improvements add up, but they add up quietly, not dramatically. Now, here is something practical that makes the whole system easy to follow, and it is the tool that finally made lunar planting feel effortless for me rather than like one more thing to track. Build yourself a simple lunar planting calendar at the start of each season. Here's how I do it. I get a printed calendar for the growing season, March through October for my zone. I look up the moon phases for each month. You can find these free online or in any farmer's almanac. I mark the new moon, first quarter, full moon, and last quarter dates on the calendar. Then I color code the 4 phases. Phase 1, new moon to first quarter, I mark green for leafy crops. Phase 2, first quarter to full moon, I mark red for fruiting crops. Phase 3, full moon to last quarter, I mark brown for root crops and transplanting. Phase 4, last quarter to new moon, I mark gray for rest and maintenance. Next, I take my existing planting schedule, the one based on my frost date and zone, and I overlay it onto the lunar calendar. I look for where my planned planting windows align with favorable moon phases, and I pencil in my specific planting days. The whole process takes about 15 to 20 minutes at the start of the season, and then I just glance at the calendar each week to see what phase we are in and what activity it favors. The Amish gentleman who first told me about moon planting does not use a color-coded calendar. He keeps the phases in his head from years of practice, the same way he knows the sound of his horses and the feel of ready soil without a thermometer. But for those of us just starting, a simple visual calendar makes the system immediately usable without any memorization. I have mine taped to the inside of my garden shed door, and it has become one of the most used tools in my entire gardening routine, not because I believe the moon controls my garden, but because following this rhythm has made me a more intentional, more organized, and more observant gardener. And that alone has been worth it, regardless of what the moon is actually doing up there. That is what I have learned from the Amish about planting by the moon. Leafy crops during the new moon to first quarter. Fruiting crops during the first quarter to full moon. Root crops and transplanting during the full moon to last quarter. Rest and maintenance during the dark of the moon. Layer it on top of your frost dates and soil temperatures, not instead of them. And approach it with the same honest curiosity the Amish bring to everything they do in the garden. I will not tell you it is scientifically proven, because it is not. But I will tell you that generations of Amish growers trust it. My own testing showed consistent, modest improvements, and it has made my planting rhythm more intentional than it has ever been. Try it for one season and see what you think. If this gave you a new way to think about timing in your garden, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Subscribe if you want more of these deep dives into how traditional growers approach things differently. Thanks for spending time with me today, and I will see you in the next one.